Sir, if you would, just state your name and spell your last name for us.
Thomas Blakey, B-L-A-K-E-Y.
Tell me how and why you got involved in the military.
Pearl Harbor. Everybody got involved in it.
So you went down and volunteered, or were
I
drafted?
did. Went down and volunteered.
I got to explain to you that because of the way the mic is positioned, nobody's going to hear me.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
So we're just going to hear you, and
Okay.
that's a good thing.
No, well, that's debatable.
Now, how'd you get in the paratroops?
Life magazine in 1941, early, they did an article on the paratroopers. And Hal Allen and I both, who was my high school friend, they impressed us, and we both decided that's where we wanted to be. So when we volunteered in the Army, we volunteered for the paratroops.
Can you give me some idea of the training that you underwent, what it was like, and how you felt about things?
Well, the first thing they tried to do, even in basic training, they tried to wash you out. They wanted to see how far you would go, and if you went to limit, they took you. If you didn't, you were gone. It was tough. We were probably the best trained troops that the Army had. I think that shows up later in later life in the later months of the war, when the history of the 82nd and 101st came forward in battles. I think they showed up that the training was so good.
Tell me about how you went overseas and what that was like.
Went overseas in late '43. Went to North Ireland, and it was cold. Oh man, it was cold. The wind blew off that. We were up on the North Sea, a little town called Port Stewart, and the wind blew all the time. It was miserably cold up there 3 months.
Now, you joined the division after it made its first combat jump in Sicily and jumped also at Salerno.
Right.
Or at least some of them.
I joined them in England.
So how was that, joining a unit as a replacement that's already veterans? How were you received? And
Very well. There was no problem. Close ties between soldiers who had been there a long time was there. You expect that. I didn't try to make a lot of friends in the Army. I didn't even want to know their names. Losing friends is is a major problem. I didn't want to be involved in that.
were you able to, well, just talk about being in England and the training you guys went through before Normandy.
We did several jumps. We did a lot of road work. We did a lot of map work. Everybody that didn't know how to read a map got to learn how to read a map. We got lessons in that. We got tactical lessons out in the field when the weather permitted, which was a good bit of the time. It was just the ordinary run of training that the Army gives people, but they gave us more of it. I thought they did. And I still think we were the best trained troops in Europe.
So facing your first experience in combat, you felt you were prepared and trained for that?
Yeah, I knew I was. No problem. That wasn't the problem of I had no fear of I knew what to do. It was a matter, my fear was, could I do it? Would I be able to hold my end up?
That kind of leads me to a question about why do soldiers fight, do you think? Is it for their country? Is it for a cause? Is it for their buddies in their unit? Well,
I've heard all of those. I went in the Army because of Pearl Harbor. You can classify that in any way you want to. I felt violated. I felt that I'd been trod upon, and in the weeks and months to come, the more we came, the more it looked like we wasn't ever going to win the damn thing. But it finally worked out. But I never had any doubt about us winning. We just had to do some things that would put us in front, and we did. It was slow in coming, but it came. Never had any doubt about it.
Okay, how about the time in England? Did you did a lot of training? Did you get a chance to go out and meet the English people?
Oh yes, yeah, we had a marvelous time with the English people. We were at Nottingham. My bunch was at Nottingham, and we were on a cricket field. A Players Please was a cigarette in. They had this cricket field there, and we had pyramidal tents on that field. Half a block down the street was a pub. Was on company property. Nottingham was a wonderful place. Good people. There wasn't any soldiers there. There was a battalion of laborers there that had been there a while, and they put a line down the middle of the town. You here and we there, and it didn't have any. It was all right, but there was plenty to go around. It was no problem. We had a wonderful time in Nottingham.
Were there problems between you guys and the laborers that they had?
Was to start with.
What caused that tension?
At that stage of history, there was a problem with black and whites. It's undeniable there was. And they didn't like us any better than we didn't like them. So it was a problem.
Okay, talk about when they locked you down in the camps before the invasion.
We went to a place called Saltby Air Base, not far out of Nottingham, and they locked us down. Barbed wire enclosure, about every 100 yards was a machine gun, and we knew that anybody tried to climb that fence was going to get it. So I don't think anybody wanted to go out like that. My assessment of my people's frame of mind was there was two ways to get home. A severe wound, which nobody wanted, or a trip through France and Germany, and everybody wanted. We were anxious to get that thing started. The first step going home was a trip through France. Everybody wanted it. There was never I never came across any negative thinking about, well, what if we don't make it, or some junk like that. It was never in anybody that I know of anybody's mind. We were on our way home.
Did they brief you about the mission, what you're going to do, where you're going to go?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about
We got a lot of sand tables. We got a lot of photographs. They neglected to tell us about the hedgerows. They neglected to tell us that we might be scattered. And we were. And everybody makes some kind of a deal about that being scattered. But my assessment of that was that it worked to the Germans' disadvantage a lot more than it did to ours. The Germans thought there was a whole lot more paratroopers than there really were by being scattered out. There was reports coming from everywhere that we were attacked by paratroopers. They were only attacked by a few, trying to get to where they belong, where they're supposed to be.
Tell me about the equipment load you guys had going on this operation.
Well, I'm not real sure how much it all weighed. I'm sure it weighed well over 100 pounds. Everybody had two chutes, a reserve chute here and a main chute on their back. They had all their pockets full of stuff. We had our personal things like a couple of pairs of socks, a couple of change of underwear, handkerchief, tooth powder, toothbrush, razors, blades, mirror, one of those metal mirrors that the Army gave us. Some had flashlights. I had a pair of binoculars. We had different things, personal things. Then on top of all that, I carried 4. We all carried 3 or 4 grenades. We all carried 5 days, what we thought would be 5 days of ammunition. I carried 4 bandoliers of M1 ammunition. The guys that carried Thompson machine guns had these web things that went around them with pockets that a clip would go in. He had 10 or 11 of those, heavy. And then 2 canteen full of water. And then 15 K rations, 5 days worth of rations in K rations, and we broke them down. We opened them all, took what we wanted out of them, and threw the rest of it away. Got rid of the rest of it to conserve space. We carried that, and we carried everything we were going to eat for 5 days. We couldn't look to get help for 5 days. Well, that was the synopsis then. But they didn't tell us about hedgerows.
So that was pretty heavy load. I've seen pictures of guys having to get pushed up in.
Yeah, you had to get pushed in. You couldn't get in. You couldn't get in there by yourself, and you couldn't walk. You had to shuffle. You were strapped so heavy. But when you got on the ground, you lost 2 chutes, which was some weight off of you, and I don't know how much, but it was some weight off of you that you got rid of, and you had what was left. But most of us, there wasn't any obesity in the paratroopers. If you came in obese, you lost it in a hurry. So I would imagine the average common weight would be around 100 and no more than 140 pounds. I weighed 140 pounds, had a 28-inch waist.
You're pretty tough.
I was tough. We all were. We were all in. Never have I been in physical condition like I was then. And I think all of them will tell you the same thing. 6 miles. The reveille was 6 o'clock. You fell out at 6:15. You double timed around Lawson Field, which was 6 miles. You came back and you had breakfast. That was every morning. Rain, shine, sleet, or snow.
Well, now, I've seen pictures of General Eisenhower visiting the paratroopers, and I know other people did. Did anybody come around and visit you guys before he took off?
Not that I'm aware of. They didn't come in my hut.
Okay. Speaking of the huts, what kind of living conditions did you have on the airfield when you were locked down?
We were in a hangar at cots about this far apart.
Pretty close.
Pretty close and miserable. It was getting to be a community problem with the closeness of it. The time we were there 4 or 5 days, and then when we had to stand down one night, that was the sickest bunch of guys you ever saw. Because everybody wanted to go.
Did they tell you why you had to stand down that time?
We knew the weather was raining, miserable. We couldn't get out. It was miserable weather. We have a film in the museum. It's called, it's by Eisenhower. It's his term, okay, let's go. That was the last, after he took his final vote from his committee. He was number 7, and it was split 3-3, and he said, okay, let's go. That was it. He was over. He had nothing to do with it after that. It was all done. I felt, as I've seen more of it, I feel so sorry for him at that time, because here's this whole thing, and he's worked up, and he uses these 3 words, okay, let's go, and he's out of it completely.
Well, tell me about loading up on the airplanes and getting ready to go that night.
Everybody was very, very serene and calm. There was no problems. There was no jocularity. There was no kidding around. Everybody was in their serious state of mind. We got in our equipment and loaded up, and after we got on the plane and started over, there was people doing their beads, and there was people maybe whispering to each other very quietly, but it was a calm, serene occasion. The pilot got on the intercom going over and broke it and said, okay guys, look down. And we looked down, and you never saw so many boats in your life. We were passing over the Armada, and it was a chilling experience. How can we lose with all of that? I think everybody was ready to go.
Well, let's talk about when you got to France and you hit the coast and the German anti-aircraft fire opens up.
The aircraft fire opened up on us between the islands of Jersey and Guernsey. That's where we got the first aircraft. And that was kind of frightening, but it was something that we couldn't do anything about and couldn't control. It was kind of frightening to sit up there on that damn plane and think you may get shot down here. Well, that was, nobody wanted that. We got out of that and got out of that aircraft and got out of that aircraft fire and got into the coast and hit a fog bank. And the planes were, and you're sitting there, well, am I going to bump into somebody else? And you got all these airplanes, and I guess they're going in different directions. You don't know. We finally got the lights, come out of the fog bank and got the lights, and then the aircraft started again. And we went out. I looked at my watch while I was standing up, and it was 1:45. So I know I was on the ground by 1 o'clock, 1 a.m. I couldn't find anybody. There was a lot, I could hear a lot of planes, I could hear a lot of anti-aircraft, and I could hear small arms fire. I'd go over there to where I heard some and couldn't find it. I'd go over there where I heard some. I did this for a good long time. I said, hell, I'm going to sit here and wait till daylight and see what I can find. So I did. And I found shortly after daylight, there was 6 of us that got together. They were 507 boys. We found out where we were. We were at the little town of St. Marcouf, which was up on the western end of the whole Normandy thing. Beautiful little town.
What's tell me about the difference being in the airplane, pretty noisy, and then getting out the door, and on the way down, what kind of noise were you facing there?
Well, anti-aircraft fire and shelling, you could hear boom, 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 and small arm fire. You can see tracers coming up at you. It doesn't take a scientist to figure out what those tracers.
During the night, you're by yourself. It's dark. There's a lot of shooting going on. What were you thinking? I mean,
well, I'm thinking, why am I here? For one thing, what did I do to deserve it? Misery loves company, and you wanted someone to be with you and to be with. I looked hard to find somebody. I never could found chutes, but I never could find anybody in those chutes or know where they went. They went somewhere else. I don't know where they went. I finally found a couple of 507 guys, and then we found 2 more, and found a road, and started down the road, and we came to a churchyard, a sunken road in a church. Normandy was full of these sunken roads, 6 or 8 feet down from the ground level, and there was lots of them, and most of them all were through church areas where there was cemeteries. We were at this little church at St. Marcouf, and in the cemetery area of it. We had a photographer with us that took some pictures of us. One of them is down in the museum. We started down this road looking for a road sign, and we were company deal, Army deal, on a different side, staggered, and the 2 front guys got out there in front and caught a machine gun fire, and both of them were killed. So we pulled back, and we knew that was more than the 5 of us could handle. I wasn't used to trying to get into that deal. We later found out that was the back protection of the big installation there at St. Marcouf. There was a big bunker installation there, anti-aircraft and big guns there, and these guns were evidently the back protection of it. We got up and went back around the other way and found a roadside, St. Mary Glees, that way, which would be east 6 or 7 kilometers. So I knew where I was supposed to be at La Fleur was between where I am and St. Mary Glees. So we headed down that road. Had to get off a time or 2 for German vehicles, but we headed down there and finally got through and worked our way through and found some more American troopers who were at the bridges. There was 2 bridges there, La Fleur bridges. Hell of a firefight.
Were you in on that
Killing
firefight,
field. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was a hell of a fight. We had half those bridges, and the Germans had the other half, and they wasn't going to let go of it.
I guess you weren't going to let go of your half.
I have either. We had a bazooka man there, and I can't call his name now. The Germans they had taken some French Renault tanks, which were small, and redesigned them and redid some things to them, and they threw 5 of those at us. And this guy knocked out 4 of them with a bazooka. And they were in the shape where they couldn't get those out of the way and get some more tanks in there. So they were had a problem with it. And the Germans would come up and get behind those tanks and fire at us. We held our ground though. A lot of fighting. I think that's as good of a firefight as I was in the whole war.
You know, you probably already told us, but when you're young and you're dumb and you're indestructible and you go to combat, usually something happens in the first few hours to explain to you that you are in a situation where you are in danger and you may not make it out of here. Do you recall what it was for you that put the face of mortality on?
Well, after I'd gone to 2 or 3 places trying to find somebody, I finally found a place that I'm going to sit down here and let somebody find me. That's when I began to think about, I said, you sitting here, you can be captured, you can be killed. Yes, that's when it was, when I sat down and said, I'm not going to go in anymore. I'm going to sit here and let somebody find. Then those thoughts crept in. Yeah.
In military operations, it's unusual for a unit to be scattered all over everywhere. Usually you think about units being together and fighting that way. But you've already said that the scatter was kind of an advantage for you guys. Now, talk about the difference between paratroops and a regular unit. And how
I don't know about the regular units. I don't know anything about them. I can draw you a parallel to what I'm talking about. We were scattered all over Normandy, 101st, 82nd, all over. The British evidently got in pretty well in a group. We went to Holland on a wonderful, beautiful Sunday fall afternoon. Gorgeous day. 400 planes. Everybody got exactly where they were supposed to be. It wasn't a damn bit better. It wasn't a bit better. I don't see any. I know the Army was awfully upset about Sicily and Salerno being scattered, and of course Normandy, they were really upset. That's the reason they went on Sunday at daylight in Holland, but it wasn't a bit better. The plane I was in was called Peaches from Mobile, okay? You would normally think the pilot was from Mobile, Alabama, wouldn't you? Okay. I had a manifest, and I knew his name. Many years later, I was going through Birmingham. I hunted a lot around Birmingham, and I was going through Mobile, going up there, and I said, I'm going to get his name and stop and call him. So I got his name, and next time I went up, I stopped, looked his name up in the book, and there it was. Called him. You, yep. You, John Jones, yep. My name is Tom Blakey. You dropped me in Normandy. The line got perfectly still. I got to thinking that, well, he hadn't hung up because I hadn't heard it buzz. But he finally said, I knew one of you bastards was going to call me one of these days. I said, I'm not mad at you. He said, well, you were pretty well scattered. I said, I know, but you had problems that I'm not aware of. Come to find out later, the last 8 months I was in the Army, I worked for Lieutenant General Lewis H. Brereton, who commanded the 9th Air Force and the Troop Carrier Command. I was telling him, he asked me about being scattered in Normandy. And he told me why, or some of the reasons why. These planes were coming through Jersey and Guernsey, and they were getting anti-aircraft fire there. They got ashore, and they got into this cloud bank. From the time they crossed that shoreline there until they crossed the peninsula to the other shoreline, they had 23 minutes to find that drop zone and get rid of those guys. 23 minutes. They spent most of it in that fog bank. I think that's the main reason that they were so scattered. These guys they couldn't take these plane load back to England with them. They had to get rid of them. Some of them were fortunate enough to find the right places. Some of them were not. I never blamed that guy for dropping me where he did. And after I heard the reasons for it, I blamed him even less. He had an airplane up there and 18 men plus his crew that he was responsible for. He had all he could say grace over.
We need to change state.
It was part of the weather, which they knew was going to be a problem.
So about what time of the day was it on the 6th when you showed up at LaFleur and at the bridges and the firefight? When did you finally get back to where you're supposed to be?
Oh, shortly after noon. I don't know exactly when. It was after lunch. It was afternoon though. We had to get off the road several times and wait for people and convoys to go and move along.
Was there a lot of German movement?
It was a good bit, yes.
Can you describe the German convoys? Did they appear to be concerned about the paratroops? Were they worried about airplanes?
They didn't seem to be, and of course they went by us in a hurry. We never got really a chance to look up and pick up and see them all that well. When the motors faded out, we got up and went down and started down the road again. The thought, there was only 5 of us at that time. The thought was to get where we could find somebody else and then do damage. The 5 of us couldn't do much damage to a convoy, 4 or 5 trucks going down the road. Those guys would have us in their sights before we could turn around real good.
Well, tell me about the rest of the first day, what you were doing.
The rest of the first day, we finally got to the bridges, and we took up positions where they wanted us, and we started firing.
So that fight went on through the whole rest of the day and into the evening?
Into the evening, and into the next morning, we had that's when the 5 tanks came in the next morning. It was a real killing field the next morning. We had a severe, hard counterattack. We knew it was coming, you know. Germans always counterattacked.
What are your thoughts about the Germans as soldiers? What do you think of?
I hear these historians that tell me about all these young kids and old men, and I had the misfortune of never finding any of those. We had, at the time that the 82nd Division went overseas, the average age of the division was 18 years, 4 months. So we had a bunch of kids too. And if you wanted to call late 20s and mid 30s old men, we had a bunch of old men officers. But those kids that they're talking about, I don't know where this comes from, although I know there probably was a bunch of them in uniform, but unfortunately I never saw any of them.
So the German soldiers?
German soldiers were good soldiers. They were, and they had good equipment, and they were hard to take out. They wasn't a bunch of dummies. We wasn't up against a bunch of dummies. They were well talented people, good soldiers.
You ever run into any German paratroopers on the ground?
Yep. And you could tell real quick by the helmet. They didn't have that big flange. It was just a little narrow thing around here and you could tell it right quick. When you saw, if you could see the helmet, you could tell if he was what he was.
Is there a difference between?
Yes. They were as good of fighters as we were. They were well trained. Had the spirit.
I don't think there's any better compliment in the soldiers' inventory than that one.
Well, I can only vouch for, a soldier doesn't see the overall picture. All he sees is what's right in front of him, a line soldier, and he doesn't know what else is going on, and this is what he bases all of his opinions on, is what he sees right in front of him.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. So tell me about when the ground forces moved in from the beach and linked up with you guys. What was that like? Who was it?
Well, it was 4th Division came to us, and I don't know whether it was the 3rd or the 4th night, afternoon late. It was one or the other, and I can't tell you which one. Well, we were damn glad to see them. We were getting low on ammunition. We had to scrounge for ammunition. Some of the guys went back took the ammunition of the dead guys off, and you reused that. We were out of bazooka ammunition. Machine gun ammunition was scrounged. They was getting close to the lick log when they came through.
What happened to you after you linked up?
Well, we got back where we belonged, in the line, made in lines, and into units. The people could begin to come in and swap around, and first thing, we took up a divisional front. We were to cut the peninsula, go across the peninsula, which we did, and we had two good fights going across the peninsula at La Haye-du-Puy was a little town that some of the boys that had to take. My group took Saint-Sever-Vancamp, and that was a house-to-house deal. First time we'd ever been house-to-house. First time I'd ever been house-to-house. I hadn't even known how to do it.
What's that like fighting in a town like that?
It ain't fun. A lot of guys get killed in a town like that because you have to show yourself, and if you've got someone up in one of those houses, he's going to get you. I went down a block, and I came to a doorway that had steps going down about 6 or 8 feet into a basement type thing, below the level of the ground. And I could hear some conversation in there and rattling of mess kits, and I figured there was a bunch of German soldiers in there eating lunch. And I did 2 grenades, 1-1, 2-2, put them in there. I don't know what happened to them. I didn't go in there. I went on down the block, and I know that they couldn't withstand 2 grenades, and there wasn't enough of them. I don't know how many of them there were. And as I was going down a block, I could see there was an opening down at the end of the street. It looked like it was maybe 20 feet wide, and I eased up there, and as I got closer to it, I could tell that it was tables and chairs in there. And I got to the corner and looked in, and there was a man behind the bar. It was a restaurant or a bar, and there was a man behind the bar, shining glasses. And I hollered. I looked at him, and he looked up at me, and I said, "Bush, Pa Bush, Pa Bush." So I went in, and he poured me a glass of wine, and I drank it with great glee. Everybody, all us guys that went to Normandy and carried a canteen full of water, found out right quick that canteen would hold wine. So they filled it up. And I went on my merry way. But that was a big deal. Saint-Sever-Vancamp was a tough area. So was La Haye-du-Puy. But we cut the peninsula, and the fourth division turned west after they went through us toward up N13 towards Cherbourg. They took Cherbourg.
Tell me about the bocage and the hedgerows and such.
Hedgerows we didn't know anything about those. They came as quite a shock, and there was a lot of boys got killed in the hedgerows. I'm not real sure they would not have been killed had they known about them. But being an old boy from Texas, I knew a little bit about cattle. And most all of these things were pastures, and they were connected with a fence, with gates, that this farmer would move his cattle from pasture to pasture to let the grass grow. So you come to a hedgerow and you peek in there, and there's a 8 or 10, 4 or 5 cattle sitting down on the ground chewing their cud. There's nobody else around. You go to another hedgerow and you peek through, and there's 4 or 5 cattle out there with huge bags, and they are fidgety, and they're mooing. There's nobody around, because somebody would have milked them if there'd been anybody around. Germans like milk just like we did. So there wasn't anybody there. And they wouldn't. You go in there and find them agitated and moving around and nervous like. There's somebody there. City boys didn't know that. We milked a lot of cows. I'll guarantee you that helmet a whole lot of milk.
What else can you tell us about the fighting in Normandy?
Well, fighting in Normandy was I guess, is about like it was every place else. The difference was the terrain with the hedgerows made it different. It certainly affected the tank guys. They had to stay on roads, and it affected them quite a bit. It really didn't affect us all that much, except we had to be very careful about crossing them and taking them. You had to find a gate, one, and you'd send somebody up at the outside. If you were in this hedgerow here, you got a line here, you send somebody up here and up here to see there's none of this. And then you could concentrate on what's across here. If you could clear this side out, these two sides out, then you could clear that, you could handle that side. You could go around and come into it that way. Took longer, but it had to be done. And you had to be careful when you went up this way. You had to be careful of this one. This one here may be harmed. Those are the kind of things that cost people wounds and deaths.
So the fighting there was pretty short range?
Short range. Sometimes awful close. And in the houses, in the little old cities, it was hand to hand was very common.
And you got away without a scratch. You're a lucky man.
I'm a lucky man. I've been lucky all my life. I've been a very lucky person. I've never had anything really bad to happen to me. Whatever health-wise things could happen, we were able to take care of it with a knife, and that was no problem.
Well,
I came close. I had bullets in my clothes, sleeves, and I was blown about 15 feet with a 88 shell, but I never got any shrapnel or any damage from it. 88 was a wonderful gun. God, we hated it.
I was just about to ask you, what was it you guys were most afraid of in terms of the German weaponry?
Incoming. I guess everybody was. We all reacted to it. You could hear most everything coming except the 88s. When somebody hollered incoming, I don't care who you are or where you went to a hole as quick as you could. And after we got into the Bulge, they came in with this tree stop stuff that would explode up in the tree level, and shrapnel would come down. And if you went in an open hole, you could get a piece of shrapnel in there. That's why we put those things on top of it.
Well, let's talk about after you guys were done in Normandy, what happened then?
We went back to England and got a 7-day furlough. And so everybody, most of the guys were going to London and Blackpool and wherever there was a bunch of stuff like that. And Barney Major and I didn't want any part of that. We went down to the train station, and there was a traveler aid lady there. Like we had traveler aids in all of our depots. They did too. And beautiful lady, tall, mid-40s, severe hair in a big bun in the back, and just British to the core. I mean, just beautiful. I asked her, if you were an American soldier and you wanted to go someplace where you wouldn't see any other soldiers, where would you go? And she said, without hesitating a second, she said, Lake Windermere. Bonus. Bonus on Lake Windermere. Catch a train to Kendall and catch a ride to 6 miles to Bonus. That sounded good. So we did. We bought a ticket to Kendall. I had about $600, and Barney had about the same amount. We bought a ticket to Kendall and caught the train and went to Kendall and got there the next morning. Oh, not quite daylight, and there wasn't any movement around town, so we found the road to go to Bonus and walked. We got to the town. We got to the little town of Bonus. Before anybody was up, there was a pub and an inn, and we put our bags on the doorstep and walked down 300 or 400 yards to the lake, and there was a boat there, boatman's. He wasn't there, but he had boat business, and none of the boats were locked. So we just took one and put it in the water and rowed out to a little island 300 or 400 yards off out in the water, and walked around the island and got in the boat and rowed back. And the boatman was there, and we paid him, and we chatted and went back to the inn. They had picked up our bags, put them in a room for us. Nothing was disturbed, just put the bags in one room, which we thought was, yeah, that's pretty good treatment for a couple of dog faces. I told Barney, I said, Barney, I'm going to stay here till my money runs out. Okay. Well, we milled around town and met the people, and about the middle of the afternoon, we met a delightful British soldier who was a sergeant and had been all through India and Burma, part of Burma at that time, and he was there doing some class work with some WWIIs. They had an officers training school for 75 WWIIs, 200, 300 people, 2 miles from town. Well, that gave us all the activity we wanted. We stayed there 21 days.
7 days furlough.
We got back broke. Where have you been? Been on furlough. How long you been? A long time. What are they going to do? Send us to Holland or someplace?
Good point.
They did anyway.
Well, tell me about that period now. I know that they brought you to the airfields and got you ready to jump several times and then called it off. How was that, and what did that do?
That was always a bad deal when they called it. It wasn't near as bad as the 24-hour delay at Normandy. That affected the guys a whole lot more than this next call-offs were. We didn't mind that too badly. We knew they'd get another one, and we knew we knew we were going. It was just a matter of when they wanted it. But I don't know how many times we went to an airport, 2 or 3 times, maybe 3 or 4, I don't remember. But it was called off, and security was laxed. But we did go to Holland.
What kind of briefings did you get before you went to Holland, and what was your job? What was the mission?
Bridges. That was the 101st, 82nd, and the 6th. The main thing was bridges. We were to secure those bridges so this wonderful British Army could come up all the way to Aachen through these bridges.
I sense a little bit of sarcasm on your
You
part.
did. You caught a lot of it. And I can go into it in great detail if you really want me to. We never figured, most of us never figured that Holland was going to be a success to begin with. Although when you go beyond the historians who term it a total disaster, all of the aims of the 101st and 82nd was done. We took all of our bridges and held them. 101st took all their bridges and held them. It was not our fault. It may have been a fiasco, it may not have worked, and it may have been a total disaster, but it was not our fault. We accomplished everything we were sent in there to do. Tell you a story. Jack Sullivan and I was downstairs taking tickets one day, and this tall, gray-headed fella came in. He was close to 70, he may have been in his 70s. And he gave his ticket to Jack, and Jack tore it, and they were talking, good morning, how are you, welcome to our museum, and blah, blah, blah. And he walked away. I said, Jack, that guy's Dutch. He said, how do you know? I said, I recognize the accent. Hey, called him back. And he said, my friend says you're Dutch. He says, I am. I said, where are you from? He says, I'm from Nijmegen. I said, I jumped in Nijmegen. He says, I saw you. He explained it to me. He was 9 years old. He had 2 sisters. His family, it was a beautiful sunny fall Sunday. They had been to church. They had been to his mother's house for dinner, for lunch. They were walking into his house when he heard the planes. His father heard the planes, and they were getting closer all the time. He ran and put his family in the basement. And he came back up on the porch. And as he got up to the porch, he could look across the river, and he could see these guys coming down. He ran and got his people, brought them back up, and they sat there on the porch and watched the whole damn division jump. Well, you might figure we had quite a reunion there, and had a tear or two also. He finally said to me, you mean to tell me that I had to come 3,000 miles to find a man who jumped in my backyard? It was quite an event for both of us.
Well, you've told us a little bit about the jump. Is there anything about the jump into Holland that you want to say? They talk about the anti-aircraft fire was a little more. It was shorter, but it was more intense.
It was more intense than it was in Normandy, yes. And obviously the planes got in and out, and everybody made, as far as I know, everybody made their drop zone. The fighting was heavy. Hell, the Germans didn't want to give up those bridges either. Fortunately, they didn't blow them up. That was the thing that we were having a problem with. And the 504 got the job of crossing the river in those rubber boats. I saw some of that from a distance, but God, that must have been something that was indescribable. Crossing that river in those boats and getting all that power. Then after they got ashore, they had about 800 yards of open territory to get to that other end of that bridge. But they did it. That was the biggest battle that I know of in Holland that I'm aware of was those guys crossing that river. That has got to go down in the Army annuals of anything, everything. They're paddling those boats with rifle butts.
Certainly a desire job done.
It was a desire to get the job done. That was a part of that step coming home.
What else about the fighting in Holland stands out in your mind?
Well, the same thing it does in Normandy. There was good soldiers. They were dedicated to their cause, and they fought hard. I have nothing but admiration for the German soldiers that I found.
I've heard some stories about paratroopers didn't take prisoners. They didn't expect to be taken prisoner. Did you ever encounter anything like that?
I encountered 2 or 3 occasions where no prisoners was taken. The event at La Grenier went through the division with like a dose of sauce. Don't take any. It never came down from, nobody could ever be accused of giving an order like that. It just went through the division. La Grenier was a little town not far from St. Marcouf, where it was in the 507 area, where they had taken the town. It was a tough nut, but they took it. They had a church full of severely wounded. I think it was 14 of them. That was too wounded to move. The priest, the nuns, and the townspeople were taking care of them. The next morning, the Germans counterattacked, retook the town, bayoneted all 14 jumpers, shot the priests, nuns, and the townspeople, and razed the town. All that's standing there now is one wall of the church, which is dedicated, and there's a big monument there to the 507. That came through the division, and there for about a week we did not take prisoners.
Well, let's talk about. Now, you guys were in Holland a pretty substantial amount of time.
Yep.
I mean, almost 60 days.
Yeah, a little over 60 days, I think.
So after the Brits came through with the armor, tell us about what you did and what that was like.
Well, we had some British troops that come through. I know one day there was about 4 trucks came through full of some guys that went down a little back road to Aachen, and they stopped. They crossed the bridge and got off the bridge and stopped on the side of the road and made tea. And all these guys crying for help and dying up there in Aachen. These guys stopped and made tea. That didn't go over too well with our boys. Someone went down there and let them know about it too. I didn't know what was going to happen. I wasn't going to sanction it, but I sure as hell wasn't going to try to stop it.
We need to change
Yep, it is.
like fences.
Yeah. Okay, well, you guys get pulled out of Holland and sent back to a rest camp for just a real brief period. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, getting pulled out of Holland was a bad deal for us. We knew that it was a mess. We didn't know to what extent, but the British, we were looking for British convoys to come through there day and night, and it didn't happen. I mean, we'd get a few lorries like those 3 or 4, and they would come up, but they never did. So we knew it was a bad deal. What bothered my guys that I'm familiar with the most was the Dutch people were wonderful. They were American to the core. They loved the Americans. They wasn't very fond of the British. Prince Bernhard said, well, we Dutch people can't stand another victory with Montgomery. But we knew what was going to happen. They were going to be turned back into the Germans. The Germans were going to come in right behind us and take it over again. And the German people, the Dutch people were going to suffer for it. And that's exactly what happened. And we felt very badly about that. They worked in our hospitals. I met another guy that came in here that was 18 when that was going on, and he worked in the American hospital.
Yeah, they were still occupied by the Germans when the war ended.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell us about going up to the Bulge. Tell us what that was.
Well, I'm asked about combat jumps, and my answer is two airplane jumps and one off of a truck, and that was Bulge. We were sent up there. In Gavin's book On to Berlin, he relates the story of how that happened, and it's interesting. The American Army had 2 divisions in reserve when the Bulge came along. Only 2. The 82nd and the 101st. That's the only 2 divisions that were in reserve. Both of them was in the Soissons area. And for some reason, it is not explained in the book, Gavin ordered the division to have 4 days rations and 4 days ammunition. A week before the Bulge happened. He was having dinner in his quarters with his staff on the night before we left. And I can't remember whether that's the 15th or 16th. During dinner, he got a call from Schaeff that he was the 18th Corps commander. Ridgeway couldn't be reached. The commander of the 101st was in Europe, was in Washington, Taylor, and he was ranking. So he was moved up to Corps, and he was in charge of both divisions at that time. We were to move out at dawn the next morning. Since we had rations and ammunition issued already, it wasn't any problem. 101st didn't have that. They had to get it, and they were late getting out. We were originally scheduled to go to Bastogne. And we got there in mid-afternoon, and they decided then that since we were there first, and there was no need to be there at that time, that we should go on over to the St. Vith area and set up there and let the 101st, who was behind us several hours, come into Bastogne. That's how it happened. It's in Gavin's book, On to Berlin. And we set up in the St. Vith area, at Tripont, which is 3 bridges. That's where I was. My battalion was set up.
Tell me about the truck ride.
It was cold. Cold and bumpy. You know how to back of those trucks. Well, maybe you never rode the back of one of those trucks. They're all the same, cold and bumpy.
Tell us about the way you were set up and at the 3 bridges and what the weather was like.
The weather was cold. It's snow, ice everywhere, hard to walk. It would warm up maybe in the daytime, but freeze to melt the top of that ice, and then it would freeze, and boy, it would get slick. You know how that goes. We were set up at these bridges down the Somme River, and 504 was this way, up the Somme River. The command was, you bastards, dig in and don't move. And we did. We had some problems. We were almost overrun. And the 504, part of the 504 moved one night behind us to come back over here and reinforce this area to keep us from being overrun. A marvelous move. I mean, those guys did wonderful. They'd get around there overnight. There was not much that the paratroopers were ever called on to do that they didn't do. In fact, I can't think of many things. We met Piper and his tanks.
Tell me about that.
Well, they're big, they're noisy, and they strike the fear of God into everybody that sees them coming. They did do me anyway. I didn't even like our tanks. If we had a tank pull in there, one of our tanks pull in a minute you're going to get artillery in there because they hear the sound and they're going to shoot at the sound. And one came into our area, we moved out as best we could.
How'd you stop the German tank?
We had some Panzerfürsts. We had taken enough of them to distribute around the division, and they were so much better than bazookas. Bazookas wouldn't do nothing; they'd bounce off like a bottle of water. But the Panzerfürst would knock a track.
So you used German weapons on the German tank.
Yeah. We never had anything. To compare to the Panzerfürst, and Gavin wrote a deal after Sicily about the bazookas, how bad they were and how much they needed, and never anything done about them. And even when he got to be up in the Pentagon, he never did get anything done about the bazookas. I think they've got a whole lot better things now than they had, but all that time there was never anything done about the bazookas. And they worked fine on those little Renault tanks, but that wasn't a German tank. That wasn't a Panther or a Tiger. Those things were frightening. And the 88 was, I think it was the best artillery piece in World War II of anybody's.
How about American artillery and its, when you guys were defending places with the artillery support you got pretty good?
Very little. We had some division artillery that did its job. We were never heavily supported by anything other than what we had.
Well, that's the nature of the Airborne.
Yeah. We dropped 75s. I think in 3 pieces. I'm not real sure how that went. And ammunition. Most of them came in usually on gliders, but we dropped them too.
Well, since you brought up gliders, what's your opinion of gliders, glider troops?
Glider troops were good soldiers. They had a lot of paratrooper in them. A lot of them were washed out paratroopers that had something wrong that they couldn't get out the door. We had some of that. Some of them couldn't do the physical part of it. They were good troops, and they were airborne. They had to be something to be airborne. The 325 was as good a fighting unit as it was in the Army. 325 glider regiment. We were made up of 2 regiments of paratroopers and 1 regiment of gliders. The 325 was our regiment of gliders. We all had to ride in one. In England, before Normandy, they made us all ride in a glider. Well, none of us wanted to do it. But after I got on the ground, it wasn't all that bad, but I sure didn't want to do it. They were good people. They were good people.
What else about the Bulge?
The Bulge was, of course, it was just as cold on the German side as it was on the American side. They had good troops, well trained, dedicated. They gave up. Well, when it got to be useless and they were stopped, they retreated pretty easily. I saw a bunch of them marching across the field one time. I don't know how many were. There was a bunch of them, and they were headed back to Germany. And I thought to myself, God, I hope I'm never get in that shape where I've got to give up and go back. That was always a fear for everybody, I guess, that you wouldn't be able to do your part or hold up your end. That was everybody. That was always a fear for most of us.
Well, after the Bulge, what about the end of the war? What did you guys do?
Fortunately, for me, I was standing in the little town of Spa, Belgium. And this parade of jeeps started by with red placards on the front with stars on them and a flag on the side with stars on it. And we stood there and saluted, and this front thing had 3 stars on it, slid to a halt. And this guy jumped out and he came running back, and it was my old company commander. He wanted to find out what had happened to some of the boys in Holland and the Bulge, people that he knew when he was in the company. And we were standing there talking, and here's Gavin and Ridgway and Taylor behind. I believe Taylor was. I believe he was back there. He may not have been. He may not have been back yet. Anyway, Ridgway and Gavin were both there. And this little old general walks up there, little short guy, 5'9". He said, "You know these boys?" "Yes, sir. I brought them overseas, but they were with my company." He says, "How would you boys like a job?" "Like one fine, General." He said, "Have them sent to Paris tonight." And he turned around and walked back to the Jeep. And Major Gibbons says, "That's it, fellas." Shook hands, and he got in the Jeep, and they drove off. Well, I stood there with my bare face saluting these other guys going by. We had to walk 6 miles back to the area from Spa. We'd been to Spa to get a bath. And we got back and saw one of the guys. "Where in the hell have y'all been? Everybody's been looking for you." "We've been to get a bath." "What did you do?" "What do you mean, what did we do? We got a bath." "It had to be something. The captain is having a fit looking for you. You better go see him." So I went into the orderly room and reported to the captain. "Where have you been?" "I've been to get a bath." "You told?" "Oh, yeah." He said, "What happened?" I said, "What do you mean, what happened?" "Something happened. I've got orders to send you 2 to Paris tonight." God, I didn't realize it was going to come to pass. The orders got cut in a hurry. We got on a truck and went to Paris that night. Got into Paris about 2 o'clock in the morning. Didn't know a soul. Didn't speak a word of French. And I finally found an MP. Showed him our orders. We were in jumpsuits that we'd been into for, close to a month. Filthy. Blood all over them. We're clean on the inside. We had a bath that day. This guy said, where have y'all been? Well, that's a long story. Anyway, we showed him the orders and showed him where we were supposed to go. He said, I'll have to get some we'll have to, why don't we go down to the station and we'll see what goes on. Okay, so we got in the Jeep, went to the station, and the lieutenant there said, got somebody in another Jeep and said, take these boys, you know where the street is? Yeah, take these boys down there and let them get them located. So he did. We got located. We banged on the door, and finally, here come some sleepy old Frenchman that couldn't speak English, and let us in. And we went into the kitchen, and there happened to be a old pot of coffee on the stove, so we had that and coffee. And we went into the rest of the house, and there was beds, so we found a bed and went to bed. Well, about 8 o'clock, one of them came upstairs and woke us up. There was a telephone call. It was from Major Gibbons. He was back in London, and he wanted to know we got there all right. And he said, I'll be over there in 2 or 3 days, and I'll be over there tomorrow and get y'all straightened out. So we had a bath and shaved and put on some. We had our barracks bags, so we had uniforms. We put on the uniform. Made ourselves known to the French people around there. There was 9 in that house that worked there. Made good friends with the cook, and then next morning, Major Gibbons called from Villa Coublay and said, "Come pick me up." Hell, I didn't know where Villa Coublay was. We didn't have anything. So I said, I'll call an MP. So I called MP and told him about it. They sent a Jeep out to get him. Well, the MP took him to the advanced headquarters at name of the town, I can't think of it now. And he picked up a Jeep and brought it. And he told us what our duties were going to be. And I told him I didn't want to drive the general. I would do it on occasions when it was necessary. But we had this house and 9 Frenchmen that worked there that we had to feed 3 times a day. We had to go draw rations at the depot every morning. Well, we made friends with the master sergeant who was in charge of that thing, and we got that straightened out. And we could get anything down there we wanted. Go down and ask for a dozen turkeys or 2, 4, 5, 6 hams or 10 pounds of sugar. We get it all. It didn't make any difference. And so we used it, and we did a lot of things with it. But that was our duties, and he would come quite often and be around there, and we took him to. He oftentimes wanted to go to see his troops, and we would go meet him at Villa Coublay, load the Jeep in an airplane, and take off. And we'd usually land at Liège and get that Jeep out and drive him someplace and let him see Ridgway and Gavin and Taylor and check up on what his divisions were doing and then go back to Liège, and he would load that Jeep up on the plane and he'd go back to London, and we'd put him on the plane, he'd go to London, and we'd drive back in the Jeep, is the way it worked. So it was always a cold 4, 5, 6 hour drive or some mess. But we didn't have to pull too many duties for him. We were there. We took care of his house for him and saw that it was kept in order. He came in one day and said, "I want you to go to Reims." He said, "I've got a house up there that needs to be set up. I want you to go up there and set it up for me." I said, "Okay." So I took a Jeep, went to Reims, and got a bunch of Frenchmen in the house. Beautiful place. God, it was gorgeous. Well, about 5 miles from Reims. And it was a great big 3-story chateau. Gorgeous place. And I got that straightened out for him and got it all fixed up. And he came up there 2 or 3 times, and he brought his poker club up. He played poker. I don't know if they played every week or how many times a month, but they played regular. There was two spots, Jimmy Doolittle, Pete Casada, and him, and a couple of others that I wasn't aware of, I didn't know. And they played. They came up and played poker. And one time he said, "You're from Texas?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You must know how to barbecue." I do. He said, "I'm having my poker club come up with Reams, and I would like for you to barbecue." I said, "What do you want?" He said, "Barbecue and beans." I said, "I can handle that." So he brought them all up there, and I cooked pork ribs and pinto beans for him.
What do you think of the gentleman?
They were awfully nice to me. Of course, I didn't get to get intimate with any of them, but they were nice to me. They were complimentary on the food. I made pinto beans and I fixed them up, and I got some pork ribs and cooked those, and built a barbecue pit, and got those cooked and made showed the cook how to make cornbread.
I'm just curious, kind of almost a personal question. When you're in the 505, did you ever run into Rollo Morris or Bob Gillette? They would have been in the S2 section.
No, the name's not familiar. No,
There's
but
a couple guys
that's not
before.
uncommon.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they were in the regimental
Yeah,
S2
yeah.
section, so, but they often went
Yeah.
out to the unit.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, those guys are both in Oregon, we've interviewed them, so.
No, I'm not familiar with them.
How did you sum up your time in the paratroops and in World War II?
Now that I'm here sitting across looking at you and I'm 82 years old, it was one of the most fabulous times of my life. I wouldn't give you a quarter to do it again, but I wouldn't take all the money in the world for it. And I think a lot of the guys will feel the same way. They were proud and very gung-ho about themselves then, and I think they are now too. The ones I know that are. They felt like they were a breed apart from the rest of the Army. They had a
Go ahead. Sir.
They had a tremendous amount of esprit de corps, like the Marines do. The Marines and the paratroopers were very similar in their thinkings about themselves and their organization. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Once a parajumper, always a jumper.
Tell me about your museum and how you work here.
Oh,
and
boy.
why you do that.
You don't have enough time. This is a godsend to me. I have instead of getting older here, I've gotten younger here. It's been I wake up on Tuesday and Thursday and I say, oh hell, I don't have to work today. I wake up on Monday and Wednesday and Friday, good, I go to work. I love it. It means a lot to me. It gives me a cause to do, and I enjoy doing the speaker bureau thing. I enjoy relating to people who don't know, are not familiar with World War II, and I've found out since I've been here that there are no dumb answers, questions. I have people ask me, whose side were we on? Who won the war? They were never exposed to it. They had no reason to know. They didn't get exposed to it through their home or through their schools. There's no reason for them to know.
Kind of hard to believe, isn't it?
Kind of hard to believe, but after you get to it and talking to them as much as I have, it clears up in a hurry.
think the museum here is important for?
I think it's extremely important. We have too many children coming through here. Some of it, regardless of we see kids that come through here and run through, and some of it has got, a little of it has got to rub off on them. If nothing else, they know the name and know it stands for something. But a little bit has got to rub off. And when we go to these schools and talk to these kids, a lot of it rubs off on them. And it's very, very rewarding.
Do we have any questions?
No, I did before, but I don't remember them.
Okay. Well,
We must have covered what I was thinking of.
okay. Anything just for posterity's sake you want to mention?
We were at a group one day, a large group, a couple hundred people there, giving our dog and pony show, and of course people come down to the three of us and ask questions. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye, this little lady standing there, very patiently. She stood there while all these guys were getting their questions answered, and she stood there, and finally cleared out, and she walked up to me, and she said, "Mr. Blakey, I want to thank you for mentioning the Holocaust." And she pulled her sleeve up, and there was her tattoo. That's strong. I touched that lady. I always wind up my little deal. The 82nd Division took Wobeline, which was a prison camp close to the Danish border. They were going across the North Germany to town of Lübeck, and they came across this prison camp, and they took it. And I got to see it. The most unusual thing that ever happened to me in my life was, it's unreal. It was unreal. It was just terrible. You can't imagine. There was 6,500 humans there, or in some bony. It was terrible. It was just indescribable. Pictures can tell you a better story than I can. I had one of my granddaughters crawled up in my lap one Sunday afternoon when she was visiting us. She was about 12, and she said, "Granddaddy, did the Holocaust really happen?" Well, it's just like she slapped me in the face. I said, "Where did you ever get that idea?" "Well, a bunch of kids in my class don't think it did. They'd been told it was faked." Well, I couldn't let that happen. I got all my grandkids together. They knew I wasn't going to lie to them. And I told them the story, every one of them. And they know it to this day that it happened. And they are believers.
You heard that Eisenhower quote where he called he made all the reporters go and take pictures?
Yeah.
Said that,
Well, Gavin put out patrols and got them to round up all the civilians around that camp and brought them in, made them dig graves and view it. He made them come in there. The mayor of the little town closest, and the mayor, his wife, and daughter committed suicide. There was a bunch of dead people. I have no idea how many. I wouldn't give you a number because I have no idea of what the number was, but there were stacks of them. And he made these townspeople dig graves and bury them. Nobody will ever know who's in that grave. That's beside the point.
kind of the least you could do.
Yeah. But he rounded up a bunch of people and run them through that. Gavin was a I believe he could have lined up the 82nd Division in mass on the rim of the Grand Canyon and said, "Okay, you bastards, jump," and they would have jumped.